Previously on Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
You are the Slayer. Into each generation, a Slayer is born.
Why don't we start with, hi, I'm Buffy.
Xander.
Cordelia. Willow, right?
Mr. Giles. Angel.
Hello, gentle viewers, and welcome to another episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or in this case, Alistair Reviews It. So today I'm going to be doing the Buffy Book Tag. This tag is inspired by Joseph's Buffy Book Tag from The Boy Who Cried Books. I will link his original video in the description box below. I have taken certain liberties with the prompt just because, I feel like it's inspired by, but it's not exactly the same tag. So, if you have not watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer before, it is one of the most legendary TV shows, was a trailblazer for female TV shows that were action, horror, sci-fi, and fantasy. Blazed a trail for female characters who weren't necessarily boxed into what people thought those characters should be. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you'll know that I'm a huge Buffy nerd. I collect a bunch of Buffy stuff, and this was my favorite childhood show, still is my favorite show, and I constantly rewatch it because the writing, the storytelling, everything is just amazing. It lit my love for fantasy and sci-fi. I know it's streaming on Hulu right now, and I think it's also streaming on Amazon Prime. If you do start to watch it, I don't usually do this, but I would say start watching at season 2, because season 1 is a little rough, but if you go back to season 1 after you've watched season 2 or 3, then you'll appreciate it so much more. Anyways, without further ado, let's go into this tag. So this tag is basically going to be naming main characters from Buffy throughout the series, and attributes that they have, and what books I would link to those attributes. First is Anya, or Anyanka. She is an over 1,000-year-old vengeance demon. So for her, I want to do a book that has vengeance as part of its main plotline. For this character, I chose The Rage Dragons by Evan Winter. I actually did a review on this book, and I will link it down below. But this is an African-inspired fantasy book that follows a young boy named Tao as he seeks revenge for wrongdoings against himself. There's a lot of progression fantasy in this. He does build up over time. I love how staunchly he holds onto his vengeance, which I feel like you don't see a lot. Usually they're like, but he's almost morally gray. This was one of the most exciting reads of, I think I read it last year. Did I read it last year? I'll have to look back at that. Oh my gosh, this is one of the most exciting reads that I've read in the last couple of years, and the sequel comes out this November, which I am crazy excited for. I'm actually going to be on the road, so I'm going to stop into whatever bookstore I am near and pick up Fires of Vengeance, because I am so stoked to continue on with the series. It's so good. Oh my goodness. Before going on to my next prompt, I will say that I did build a lot of rules for this prompt. Otherwise, I'd have a lot of books from the same series on it. So I'm only doing one book per series if those apply. So for this next one is Oz. And for Oz, I did a book that has some sort of beast in it, or somebody who turns into a beast. And I don't have all of the Demonata series. A lot of them are still at my parents' house. I do have Wolf Island, and this is a series by Darren Shan. I really loved his Cirque du Freak series. I did not love the ending of it. And because of that, I've read up until the last couple books in the Demonata series, because I will not be tricked again. I will not. I refuse. But they are amazing. They're considered to be YA, but if you read them, you might question why they're considered to be YA. They're very, very, very good. Very, very, very good. It's all horror fantasy. It's all horror fantasy. Do not expect happiness in the series. Expect a lot of horror. Basically follows multiple characters across a sleuth of books as they encounter the demon realm. And it's not just the demon realm. It's like really horrific creatures and people in this book. It'll keep your attention and probably haunt you. My next prompt is Terra. So I wanted to do an LGBTQ book with witchy vibes. And luckily enough, I just finished such a book. So this is Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. This is a Latinx, brujex. It's like a witch book that takes place around Dia de los Muertos in LA. And it's about a trans man who summons a ghost that he cannot get rid of. So there are little romancy things that go around in this book. So this was my book pick for Terra. So the next prompt is Willow. So for this one, I was choosing a book with mega witch vibes. And the book I chose is Harrow the Ninth by Tam Samir. So this is an amazing book. It's the sequel to Gideon the Ninth. And this all takes place in a science fiction fantasy world that's also a little bit of a horror and a little bit of mystery too. And mostly revolves around necromancy. This second book, its viewpoint is from Harrow the Ninth, who is a prodigy necromancer. And when I think Dark Willow, I think of her. You know, I think she has Dark Willow vibes to an extent. Not as evil, but like definitely very creepy. Also, I wanted to do an honorable mention for this category for the Year of the Witching, which I just finished, and it has amazing witchy vibes, but I just don't think that the character goes dark enough for me to put her at the forefront for this category. The next category is Xander, the Zeppo. So he's basically the friend in the group that doesn't have any superpowers or any real talent except for a massive amount of experience, I guess. And for this prompt, I chose Steelheart by Brandon Sanderson. So this is actually also a vengeance plot, but it's a YA, I don't know, sci-fi fantasy book. It's basically, it takes place in a world where superheroes are real, but they're all evil. The protagonist, David Charleston, his father is killed by a superhero, and so now he wants to basically seek revenge and get the world out of the troubles that have been caused by these superheroes who are actually supervillains. And that's why I chose Steelheart. It's a good book. It's a good series. A lot of people don't love the first book, and nobody hates the first book, but a lot of people don't love it. But if you keep on with the trilogy all the way to the end, there's definitely a Brandon Sanderson payoff at the end. So yeah, this is by Brandon Sanderson. My next prompt is Giles. And for this one, I wanted to do something that's nonfiction and kind of edgy. And I have this book, but I don't have it on hand because I have it at work. But is The Art of Not Giving a Freak by Mark Manson. I was given this book by a friend, and it is probably one of my most reread books ever. I always have it, either physical copy or audio book. Whenever I feel really stressed in the morning, I'll play it. And I'm somebody who cares way too much about things I should not be caring about. Somebody who tends to not put myself first. And this book has definitely centered me with that. And it's a book that I constantly need to come back to. And it's a book that is a little bit edgy. It's a little, not controversial, but like it's a book that teaches you that selfishness isn't necessarily selfish. And I really like that. For this next prompt, I have Angel. So I chose a book with a dark and brooding and dramatic character. And so for this prompt, there's actually a lot of books with this in it. But for this prompt, I chose The Eye of the World, The Wheel of Time. Book 1, I could choose more books in The Wheel of Time, but I'm just choosing the first one because multiple characters in this book are dark and brooding and just like, you know, just dark and brooding and dramatic for no reason, and you're like, why are you being a little dramatic right now? And they're like, oh, he's so stoic, there's nothing behind his eyes. And it just gave me a lot of Angel vibes, where I'm like, but I love that Angel in the actual series, like he develops as a character, so you see past his facade of dark and broodingness, and I'm hoping, as I continue on with the Wheel of Time, that I will see past their dark and brooding facades too, you know. So this is a high fantasy that takes place in a world that where their religion philosophy is the Wheel of Time. So everything happens as the wheel wills. There is basically a woven way of where everything's going to happen, and everybody has a pattern along the way. We have witches and sorceresses that have powers. However, the men in this series, the power that they would draw from is tainted because of something that happened a long time ago. And if they draw it, they become mad and kind of evil. So there's a chosen one in this book. Basically, he is somebody who will both like destroy and save the world. So it's actually pretty good, honestly. It took me a little bit to get into it, but it's pretty good. I also have a review for The Eye of the World that I will link in the description box below. So next I got Spike. And for this prompt, so both Angel and Spike are vampires, and both of them have redeemed themselves in a way. But Spike we've seen his redemption arc more through the show. And so I wanted to highlight a character who is kind of evil but has had a redemption arc. And for this one, I chose, so it's Elantris by Brandon Sanderson, but the character is Hrathen in this book. And I hope that's not a spoiler alert. I'm not sure if that's a spoiler alert. But if it is, just wait like a month and then read this book, and then it won't be so much of a spoiler alert. But this was Brandon Sanderson's first published book. I really liked it. It is a fantasy world in which the magical element has become diseased, and people are facing what that means for their society. There's also a lot of persecution for the people who do develop magical talents that at this point aren't magical talents, but make them almost walking zombies. It's very good. Very good. For this next Buffy prompt, I have Dawn, Buffy's little sister who showed up in season 5. And for this one, I have an annoying character that you grew to love. For this prompt, I am choosing Red Rising by Pierce Brown. The main character is Darrow, but one of the side characters is Severo. And let me tell you, I thought Severo was one of the most annoying characters ever, but I have grown to love him over the course of this trilogy, this first trilogy. And this is a sci-fi that takes place in the future where people have colonized the solar system, and it plays heavily on Greek mythology. People have had surgeries, modify themselves into a caste system based on different talents and attributes. It's basically, to me, it feels like a sci-fi that's written like a fantasy. Pierce Brown is not afraid of making characters who are badass and own their badassery, unlike other authors. It's basically about someone from the red class who is at the bottom of the totem pole, who invades the gold class who is at the top of the totem pole and tries to take them down. It is so good. And get through this book. At least get through this book. It has kind of a soggy middle, but it is so good. So the honorable mention for this one, I don't have the physical copy of it, is Wax and Wane. Basically the first book in the second era of the Mistborn series. And I love Wax and Wane, but for the longest time I could not stand Wayne. But now I love Wayne. I very, 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 very much love Wayne. Wax and Wane is just a continuation of the Mistborn series that takes place hundreds of years in the future. It is a fantasy. It's a high fantasy sci-fi western that gives you Firefly vibes, and I love it. The next prompt is Faith, the Vampire Slayer. For this one, I wanted to do a mortally gray but badass character. So I don't have the physical book, but for this one, I chose Rin from the Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. And this is a high fantasy book that is based on the Second Sino-Japanese War. and the atmosphere inspired by the song Dynasty. I'm somebody who actually studied East Asian history in college, and this book, while reading it, I was like, what? The actual parallels. I would even recommend to study up a little bit on the Sino-Japanese War and the Boxer Rebellion and all of that stuff before you go into it, because that makes it so much more of a satisfying read. A lot of people consider this to be grim dark fantasy, so don't expect it to be fluffy at all. And Rin is kind of a super person too, just like Faith, and is morally gray, just like Faith. Though, I mean, at the end of the day, Faith is a good person. I'm not sure about Rin, because I haven't gotten to the end. But let's see how it goes. Anyways, cha-chung. Next I have Cordelia. So this was a hard prompt. So I wanted to choose a book with some crazy good character development. And I had a lot of other books on this list kind of go with this prompt. But I wanted to choose a book or a series really at this point, that I haven't talked about much, if at all. It's the Bartemius trilogy by Jonathan Stroud. I read this years ago, like over 10 years ago, and the changes Nathaniel makes from the first book to the third book are incredible. Like, I remember being incredibly astounded. I remember being like just totally mind blown by what's going on. But basically, Nathaniel is a apprentice magician who traps a genie called Bartemius, and we see their development throughout the first, second, and third book, with a lot of trials and tribulations. And I think it's an excellent example of a character development done right. Last, but most definitely not least. So for Buffy, I wanted to do the prompt is a female superhero who makes you cry. Because Buffy makes me feel so much. And she is a badass superhero that I love. So for this one, I feel like this series does not get enough hype. Mostly because I've never seen anybody really talk about it. So it's a series I discovered in high school. This is actually the second in the series because I don't have a physical copy of the first because I haven't been able to find one yet. But it's The Green Rider by Kirsten Britton. So The Green Rider is a series. The Green Rider is a high fantasy series that takes place in a kingdom where king's messengers are called Green Riders, and they're not just messengers. They actually have like certain skill sets that go along that are kind of translated through their brooches that they wear. They're not just messengers. They're not just envoys. They're basically elite. I wouldn't call them spies, but agents for the kingdom. This follows Kerrigan Kardashian. Why was I about to say that? Kerrigan Gladion, as she stumbles across a rider who is injured, and he begs of her to take her message to the king. So she's basically running away from school, and she stumbles upon him. She has to take the brooch. She has to take the message and impersonate a Green Rider in order to take this message to the king. And the first book follows that completely through. She is chased after. There's a lot of action and adventure in the first book, and the following books just dive a lot more into the lore and a lot more into this world and a lot more into Kerrigan herself, and she becomes a pretty freaking elite fighter. It's kind of a progression fantasy now that I think about it, and it's one that I love so much. It's one of my favorite rereads, and I always reread the entire series whenever Kirsten Britton puts out a new book. And I know that she usually doesn't put out a new book until like every 5 or so years, and I really do think that she deserves a little bit more attention. A lot more attention, actually. I think she deserves a lot more attention than she gets, because this is one of my favorite fantasy series, and everybody's sleeping on it. I do want to do an honorable mention for Red Sister by Mark Lawrence. This is a super... this is a high fantasy. It's kind of a sci-fi. It's like almost a sci-fi. But I think Mark Lawrence kind of does that to his books a little bit. But I'm going to say it's a high fantasy that takes place in a world where people only live on like the equator of a planet because it's the only place that's not iced over. And in this place, there are certain people born with skill sets. You can either be like super physically strong and agile. You can have certain magical powers, or you can also have different magical powers. And this girl called Nona goes to a convent, and there's like four different sects of there's four different sects of what sister you can become. Like red sister, you're an assassin. Gray sister, you're a spy. Holy sister, you're just devoted to the faith of the ancestor. And I love this. There is LGBTQ representation, which I also loved. And this is one of the books that really surprised me in the last couple of years, because I read one of his first books by Mark Lawrence. I think it was like the Prince of Thorns. I wasn't about it. The writing was good, but I wasn't about it. It just was not my cup of tea. But then I picked this one up. I don't know why, but I picked it up and I loved it. I loved it. It definitely gives Slayer vibes. I could see Nona as a vampire slayer. I could definitely see Nona as a vampire slayer. So, anyways, that is my conclusion of the Buffy book tag. Please check out the show. Well, let me know if you have checked out the show. Let me know if you're going to check out the show. Let me know if you're going to check out any of these books, or if there's books that you think better fit the categories that I talked about and you want everybody to know about it. Please like, follow, subscribe to my YouTube channel. I also have Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and I shall see you guys later. See you later, Scoobies. Adios, gentle viewers. Bye.